Okay, so welcome today to a Fixus training session on primary mental health care minimum data set errors. So this session is primarily going to focus on identifying those errors in Fixus, how you resolve them, and some of the reporting processes around that. I've got my contact details here on the bottom. So I'm Erica from the Health Planning Intelligence team at the PHN. If you've got any questions throughout, just put them in the chat and I'll address them throughout the presentation. Or if we get a bit of time at the end, I will. You're welcome to turn your mics off and we can have a bit of a discussion. Okay. So we're going to try and keep this to under 45 minutes. It's my first time doing this type of session, so bear with me as we figure out the best way to present this to you guys. So yes, the key topics, like I said, identifying errors, resolving errors, reporting, and then evidencing your data to the PHN, usually through Folio. So we're going to cover all of that. We're not going into the broader way of how to use Fixus. We have other training sessions available for that, and there are some that are already recorded and uploaded onto our YouTube. If you are missing any of that information or are keen to find out more, get in touch with your contract manager for some more training around Fixus. Otherwise, check out the event calendar on the PHN website where we've got all of our Fixus training uploaded. All right, so let's get started and open up Fixus. So what I've done is created a case that's got lots of errors in it, and I'm going to show you how we can firstly identify those errors and then resolve them. So I'm just on my homepage here in Fixus, and I'm going to open up this client here from my client list. Good old Joe Blogs. Okay. So here we are on Joe's case. Looks pretty normal. There's a prompt here around suicide prevention episode. I will get into that into this session. So how do I find out if I have errors with my client in their case in Fixus? There are a few ways. So the first one that I like to point out is on the Details tab, there is the Validate MDS button here. So anywhere that you do see this button is where you'll be able to essentially run a process in Fixus that scans the entire case's record and looks for any errors. And by errors, I mean issues with how the data's been recorded that don't match with the rules that we have with the minimum data set requirements. So if I hit that Validate MDS button, it's going to run that process now on Joe Bloggs' case, and it's going to identify any issues that there may be. So you can see here, it's saying there are some validation issues. Please review before continuing. We've got 20 issues here. We've got some errors, and this field gives you an idea of what the actual data field is that's affected, and the description gives you a brief understanding of what the issue is. And you can see we've also got a couple of warnings here too. So the first thing I'll probably point out at this stage is that warnings are okay and not necessarily needing to be addressed in terms of reporting your valid data to the PHN every month or so. However, errors do need to be addressed regularly. And so when you are reporting to the PHN, we would expect to see no errors, but we would be okay with a few warnings. And I'll dig into what those warnings are as we address these errors. So before I start addressing them, you can see here there's a couple of buttons. Revalidate case, I would hit that if I've started to address some of these and I want to rerun the list. Autofill MDS, I'm going to get to that in a second. And then what I'm going to do right now is just return to the case. So I'm not going to do anything with this list. I'm just going to go about my business at the moment. So it's just going to take me back to where I was on the Details tab. Another place where you can identify where errors are is on the Sessions tab. So you see here, there's another Validate MDS button here. And in most of the training that I deliver, I always suggest that when you are entering sessions, because sessions is one of those types of data that you're probably entering on a more frequent basis, it's just good practice to hit that button after you've entered some data and just quickly check to see if there's anything going on with the case, any errors that might be resolved. And that can really help your organisation stay on top of these errors as they pop up. If you're not doing that regularly, you might find that you've got quite a big list to deal with. And that's okay, and it's not that uncommon for lists to look really big and scary, but I think what you'll find is as we go through this session, it's not that difficult to resolve a lot of these errors. So there is a third way to detect whether you've got errors in your data, and I'm going to show you that now, and then we will come back to this case and we're going to address some of Joe Bloggs' errors specifically. So the third way to find out if there are errors in your data is in the report menu. So up here there's a menu button, and then I'm going to hit reports. I'm going to navigate to the right page. So this is the page where you'll land when you open up the report section. And the report that we want to access is the Primary Mental Health Care MDS report. So I'm going to click that report right there. So it's asking me for a few bits of information before it gives me the data that I want to look at. So it's asking me to set a date range, and the date range is based on service contact dates. So if you know that last time you submitted your reporting, all of your service contact data was up to date and you haven't entered any since then you could start your next report cycle, after that. But if you have gone and sorry, if you could just, I'm just going to mute mics. Thanks, guys. I've got a question here in the chat that I'll just have a look at. Thank you, Mara. So how is this report different from the third one on the report list? Yeah, so this report is different in that it's the original primary mental health care minimum data set report. If you are a provider that is doing the Wayback Support Service program, I'm just going to go back a page, there's another report, as you pointed out, Mara, which is the Wayback MDS report, which is essentially this report plus a few extra things, because the Wayback data model is essentially the MDS with a few extra fields added. So tomorrow we're running a session on the Wayback, and I'll run through all that process with the Wayback providers on the difference between this and that as well. So very good question. So for today, we're looking at this one here. We'll just open it up again. So like I was saying, if you know that you've entered new session data and you've updated things for a case in prior months, make sure that your report covers that time period so that you're grabbing all the data to have a look at to see if there are errors. So I'm just going to go back to February. Some providers like to go back to the beginning of time in case they've edited data from way back, because that can happen every now and then. So I'm going to go back to February and I'm going to go up to today's date. This will auto populate with your agency's name. And for the anonymized consent field, I always suggest that you retrieve all client data. If you leave it as only retrieving client data with anonymized consent granted, that will mean that any cases where you haven't recorded the MDS consent or the MDS consent is marked as no, it will exclude them from the search. And that only makes sense when if you were to extract and upload this to the Department of Health, which is something that the PHN does on your behalf. But for the purpose of looking for errors in your data, you want to look at all client data, regardless of what type of consent you've got recorded. You want to make sure that all of your data is error-free. And you can also break down your report by program stream if you deliver multiple program stream. Otherwise, just leave it as all and it will just search all. So now I'm going to hit the validate button. And what this is going to do is basically what that validate MDS button was doing on Joe Bloggs' case, but it's scanning my entire caseload. So it's going to look up multiple records and find any errors. So I'll just give it, oh, I know why it's taking so long, because I selected all agencies. Let's just do the PHN where I've got Joe's data. Well, that could have taken us half an hour to load. I think what I'll do is just go back and reset those parameters and open up the PHN. Go back to February, to today's date. Okay. And that should run a bit quicker. It's not uncommon for this report to take a little bit to load, especially if you've got a really big date parameter, because it's quite a complex calculation that the report's doing, so it can take time to run through all the data. So here we go. We've got our data report looking at the errors we might have. So there's a few things here that I will walk you through now. So we know that we've just got Joe Bloggs on our caseload who's got some errors. So all the error counts are showing 1, which is what I would expect. But you might have a caseload of, 30, and some of these errors might be for one case, or this one might be affecting 2 cases. This one could be affecting 17 cases. So these error counts are about the number of cases that are impacted when there are errors on their case. So I'll run through all these errors in a moment. There's another box over here that shows you how many valid records you actually have in your data that would be ready for the PHN to report on to the Department of Health. So if you know that your caseload of clients within that period is 30, and this is showing a different number, that would be because the record is withheld until all the errors are addressed. So that's something to be mindful of, is this count over here. So that should be reflective of the data that you know you have in the system. And if there are issues there, that's probably due to errors on the record. So right now, all mine is showing 0 because our one case, Joe, has errors. So he's not being counted at all as a valid record. All right, so from this menu, there are a few things that you can also do. So you could view clients with validation errors, and you could also export your errors to Excel. So I'll get to the exporting in a moment. I'm going to view my clients to see which clients of mine are in these lists. So it's, I don't know why there's a random name there. Sorry, Chanel. So we can see here it's Joe. Joe is the client that's been impacted. So if you've got lots of cases that are impacted, this can be a really easy way to get a view of which of those clients' records need to be updated. I'm going to go back and reload that list. Another way to start looking at clients that are affected by the errors is to actually view the error. So this one's saying this error is related to the K10 assessment that we've got on a record, and it's saying it's an incomplete assessment. So if I view that error now, it will give me the list of clients that are impacted. So there's Joe, and if there were more clients, they would all be listed there too. And then I can actually click Fix Error to jump to where the error is and fix it. So before I start doing that, which I will do for these one by one to show you how to do it, I'll just give you an overview of the errors that we're actually looking at. I've tried to produce a variety of errors that our providers typically encounter. So the first error we've got here is the K10 assessment error. The kind of assessments that will pop up in the error list are the K5, the K10, and the SDQ. They are the 3 assessments that are connected to the minimum data set. So they'll be the only ones that are detected as an error if there's a problem there. So this is telling us that there's an incomplete assessment. So again, we'll go view it and let's fix it. Let's fix the error for Joe. So it's just opened up a new tab in my browser. So that page I was just on is still there, and I can go back and continue to work through the list. So here we are, it's taken me to the page where the error is on Joe's record. You can see now we're in Joe's case. We're in the assessment tab where the error is, and we've got an incomplete K10. So to fix that, what I would do is edit the K10 and update any of the missing fields. So you can see here there are a couple of questions that haven't been answered. So I'll, consult with my clinician and get the right info, update it, and hit save. And that will resolve the error. So we've got a completed assessment there now. So I'm going to close that tab and I'm going to go back. And when I hit back, it should be rerunning the report again. There we go, and we can see that that assessment error is gone. One thing that we have been talking to Fixus about but hasn't been changed is when I do go back and forth and rerun the report, it redefaults back to only retrieving client data with anonymized consent granted rather than the recommended retrieve all client data. So just be mindful of that. If you go back and then a whole chunk's gone from the list, it's probably because it's rerun it based on a smaller caseload than what we want. So just update that as you go. But I'll leave it as it is because Joe is appearing in this list anyway. Now, next error that we've got here is the birth date accuracy error. So the field is on the client page, is to do with their birth date, and it's saying that the information is missing. So let's go view that error. Okay, and here we are, it's Joe. We're going to go fix the error. So now it's taken me to Joe's client page. So this is different to the case page. This is a client section that sits behind the case. It's got more static information, and a client can actually have multiple cases connected to it. So the errors here on this page, and I can see here it's to do with the birth date. And I've got the client's birth date here, but I haven't advised on the accuracy. So it might be that I don't know, or it's a pretend date. So I'm going to update that to say it is accurate. And then I'm going to save this page. I'm going to close this tab now, hit back. It'll refresh the list, and on we go. Now, what you'll find is there'll be some errors like these missing ones where you edit a page once and you edit multiple fields and hit save, and it will reduce the list by a lot. So a lot of the errors are often all on the same page, so you don't have to always do that iterative process. It just depends where the error is in Fixus. So I'm going to skip this one. It's a little more complicated and come back to it. And I'm going to jump down to the episode additional diagnosis. Episode is the minimum data set language for the case. So it's saying at the case level, this field, additional diagnosis, the information is missing. And so is this field, so is this field, all these fields linked to the episode. So I'm going to do this one. I'm going to open up the diagnosis one. Again, Joe Blogs will fix the error. And this one will be taking me to the diagnosis page if it works as expected, and it does. So you can see here there's quite a few MDS fields that don't have an answer. So we'll update all of those to make sure that those get fixed. But there's a lot of fields there to update, and I don't really want to have to go through all of them. And at the moment, I actually don't know the answer to any of these questions. I don't know what Joe's principal diagnosis is or additional diagnosis, and we don't know what medications he's on. So rather than me updating the page and clicking through each one and selecting unknown, I'm going to do a clever little workaround, and I'll show you what that little workaround is. I'm going to go to the Details tab, or I can go to the Sessions tab and find that Validate MDS button. and it's just rerun that thing to show me there's a whole lot of missing information. What I'm going to do is click Autofill MDS, and what that will do is for all the fields where the answer is missing, it will automatically fill it with an unknown or not stated response. And so instead of it being an error that's affecting your data validation, it's instead a warning that says, hey, for this field, you've got the answer not stated. If you know the answer now, please come back and update it. So rather than it being an error, it's now a warning. So that's a really handy way to do that quickly, especially if you've got a lot of cases where, you know, it's early in the piece, it's your first reporting cycle with the PHN, or it's a client that you're having trouble finding this information out about. Rather than updating every field with unknown, you would just use the autofill. However, we do have these pop up as warnings to continually remind you that you should revisit these fields and put some meaningful data in there. And if we don't have meaningful data in these fields, it makes our reporting back to you guys not as meaningful and not as interesting. So definitely encourage you to make sure that if you do use this function, to address these warnings and come back and update fields regularly, particularly the diagnosis fields and the demographic fields as well. So now that we've done that, I'm going to close this. We're going to hit back, and that list should be much, much smaller. While that loads, I've just got a question here. If there was an error for the assessment, the CDAS, stating it was incomplete, I went to the error in the assessments tab, but the person declined to complete the last 2 questions of the CDAS. How do I get around this? That is a really interesting point that you raised, Mara. It's not something I can answer in today's session, but I'm going to take that one on notice and have a discussion with the team about how we might address that, whether it's something we can do in the system to allow that kind of scenario, or if it's something to do with how we conduct those assessments with our clients. So let me take that one on notice. Thank you so much for the good question. Writing some notes here now. Cool. Okay, so back to here, we've just hit back, it's rerun it, and you can see that a whole bunch of those errors are now gone. So all those missing errors have been auto-filled with the unknown or not stated. And you can see here now that our warnings list is bigger because we've done that, but at least there's no errors. So, okay, here are our 2 slightly more complicated errors that can trip people up. So let me just start with the multiple open episode one. So this error is coming up because Joe Blogs actually has multiple episodes open under the agency, which is the PHN, because the client's with me in this training exercise. So just to show you what I mean by multiple open episodes, I'm going to go back to my homepage. And again, homepage is clicking the Fixus symbol in the top left. So we're on our homepage, and you can see here, I've actually got 3 cases open for Joe Blogs. He's got a psych therapy stream, a wayback stream, and another psych therapy stream case open. And this is because he's a training case, and we've got a few different scenarios that Joe Blog is running through. However, for most of our providers, we wouldn't expect any of your clients to have multiple cases open at the same time. However, there are a few exceptions. We do have some organizations that are delivering multiple program streams where it would be appropriate for a client to be seen in both because they're both quite different services. So those organizations should know who they are. If you're not sure and you anticipate that type of scenario coming up for you, if you are a provider that does deliver multiple program streams, have that discussion with your contract manager. So in that scenario, we allow that error to occur. So in your reporting to the PHN, when you show your data validation, it would be okay if that error is there because there's no way around it. It's just a limitation of the MDS data model. it's a bigger conversation we're having with the Department of Health about how we better, record data that where, clients are accessing the same provider, but for different services. So if you've got any questions about that, get in touch with your contract manager, otherwise get in touch with me, and we can talk about it as well. So we're going to leave that one. There's not much I'm going to be able to do about that, unless the situation is that I accidentally made 2 cases for Joe. He's got two cases in the psychotherapy stream. He should only have 1. So rather than closing one, we would ask Fixus to merge them if the case is that, there's been accidentally 2 made and 2 different, data sets and sessions were recorded across both, we would merge them. Or if one was made in error and there hasn't been much data entry and you don't mind losing it, then we would delete the case. So if you do get in the scenario where you accidentally duplicate a case for a client and you encounter the multiple episode error, get in touch with your contract manager to help work out whether we request to Fixus that the case is merged or deleted from the database. Okay, the next error that we're going to address is the practitioner cultural training error. So there are a few errors that can come up with the practitioner fields. These often really confuse people because this data isn't actually on the case. So this data isn't on Joe's case. It's actually on my clinician profile. So top right-hand corner up here is where my information is stored about my clinician profile. Some of that information is actually connected to this minimum data set. So if I'm the practitioner who's connected to Joe's case and my data as a clinician isn't up to date, it's going to show errors in Joe's record. That's how the data model works. So if you see this error, it's to do with your staff member's practitioner profile having an issue. And I've made this error come up in particular because it's a little bit of a tricky one and has some really specific rules around it. So I'm going to walk you through that. So let's view the error. How we're doing for time. Not too bad. Okay, so it's saying that I'm the client, but I'm not. This is actually the practitioner profile. If I go to fix error, so let's just say I'm not Erica, I'm someone else, and I've detected this error. If I go to fix error, it's going to take me to my own practitioner profile by default. You can't open up another staff member's profile and edit their details. So you'll actually have to get the practitioner who's having the error to log into Fixus and update their own information to resolve these. So I always say keep your practitioner profile up to date right from the get-go when you first log into Fixus. So let's fix the error because I am Erica and I'm logged in. So here I am at my clinician profile. So there's a few MDS fields here that we need to update. Year of birth didn't come up as an error. I have the 9999 in there, which is accepted as an answer if you don't want to put your date of birth. But again, they track date of birth in the MDS to understand the workforce delivering these services, so it is a good idea to put your year of birth. The error was in this field, the ATSI cultural training, but I've actually got the field filled out, so it doesn't make sense to me that there's an error. The thing with this field is that there are some really specific rules around what answers are allowed, depending on what your answer is, around your Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent. So if you encounter this, these are the golden rules. If you are neither Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, then your response to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural training field should either be yes or no. Not required is not an acceptable answer because the requirement is that if you're not Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, you should have training. And if you don't, then that needs to be flagged in the data and that's something that we can follow up to encourage our providers to ensure that that staff member does have training. So you would assume that a clinician who isn't Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander has had cultural training. So the ideal answer that is accepted and should be put in there is yes. You can put no, but it will keep flagging and saying you need to revisit this because the answer should be yes. Make sure you do your training. You can't have not required because it is required. Now, if your response to this field is either you're Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander or both, then you're allowed to select not required because by virtue of being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander or both, in most organisations, you do not need to actually undertake cultural training. So that is how that data works. So if you do encounter the error, that's the rule, just so you're aware. So let's hit save. And it's going to save my clinician profile. It's taking me back to my home page. I'm going just up here to the report page that we were on before. If I hit back, it should rerun the report now, and that error should be resolved. There we go. So the error is resolved. But we have one error because we are one of those special organisations where this error is allowed. Okay, so next thing I want to show you guys is evidencing proof that you've addressed all of your errors in the reporting period when you have to report to the PHN. So I've got a screenshot here that might look familiar. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Go 200. Oh, that was a lot. So this screenshot is showing you what a folio checklist can look like. So we're stepping out of Fixus and just talking about folio for one moment. Folio is the monthly or quarterly reporting requirement that our organisations have. And one of those questions in your checklist, if you're a Fixus user, is to evidence that you've validated all your data. So an example here is, this is a COS, continuity of support, monthly reporting checklist. What's the period? Is your data compliant? Yes, and they've attached evidence of that compliance. I'm going to show you now how you get that evidence of compliance and what the acceptable forms of that are. So let's go back to Fixus. So I've run my report. So this is where you have to show your evidence. So you've actually got to run the PMHC MDS report. And what you can do is either send a screenshot of this. So to show you, for example, grab a screenshot just like this. You can see I've just used the snipping tool on my computer and grabbed a screenshot. You can save that as an image and attach that in the folio checklist to show that you've addressed all your errors, obviously except the one error that's allowed for your organisation, if you're one of those. And that would be okay, and that would be enough to show that you've addressed your data for the period. Another way, which can be a little bit easier if your list is quite long, is to export the errors to Excel. So I'm going to do that now. So that's a button just down here at the bottom, export to Excel. I'm going to open it to show you how it looks. And you'll basically get a little Excel report that shows you the errors. There's only one, and the rest are warnings. So again, ideally, all the errors, there's no errors in the list. The links here, you can leave them in because if a contract manager were to open them up, they wouldn't probably be able to access them anyway because they either may not have a Fixus login or they wouldn't have permission to view a case. So that's okay. And you could attach this as well, or maybe you want to PDF it or put it in a Word document and you could attach that to your list, your checklist in folio, and that would be enough to show that for that period, here's your data, there's no warnings, there's no errors. So that is how you show the PHN that you have addressed your errors. So that pretty much brings us to the end of the presentation. I'll just put my contact details back on the page. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now. You can type or you can turn your mic on. This training has been recorded, so we will share a link via your contract managers once that's uploaded to YouTube, and you can come back and watch this exciting session anytime you like. Thanks all. I'm going to stop the recording.